South Africa's municipalities are facing challenges. Join Kagiso Trust in partnership with BizNews from June to explore radical collaboration between local government and communities, creating circles of unity for mutual benefit. We'll host dialogues, Twitter spaces, and a breakfast seminar with leaders and experts. Join us to tackle corruption, service delivery, and improve local government. Join us in this important conversation. Hashtag radical collaboration, hashtag power of the circle, hashtag get involved.
Welcome to another episode of our campaign where we are trying to get stakeholders, particularly civil society, to participate in the politics of the country in order to improve service delivery. This time around, we're going to discuss electoral reform. What difference will it make? And I've got two experienced people as my guests here. Tselane, who is the former member of the Independent Electoral Commission and founder of his own outfit called the Institute of Electoral Management Services. Terry, please correct me if I'm saying it the wrong way around.
IMSA, for short, stands for Institute of Election Management Services in Africa.
Thank you. And Dr. Sithembile Mbete, a political commentator and a lecturer at the University of Pretoria, well known and has got strong views regarding electoral reform in the country. Dr. Mbete, thank you very much for joining us and being part of this panel discussion.
Thanks, Tim. I'm also the director of programs at Future Elect, so I teach civic education to young people as well.
You're the right person to talk to on this particular matter. So my interest in having both of you in this discussion is based on the fact that we've always had the question of electoral reform on the agenda in South Africa for at least 20 years or so. It's taken long, but it now has been passed into law by the president. But why, Terry, let me start with you. Why do you think we needed to have this reform? It's got its own shortcomings, and we'll discuss those in a moment.
Thank you very much for having me. Well, there are two main reasons. Firstly, as you correctly indicated, there's always been an attempt to try to have a proper reform and a proper electoral system in South Africa. It started with Van Zyl-Slabbert report and the Motlanthe report, and quite a number of pressure groups have actually been advocating for this. But perhaps most importantly, it is the Constitutional Court judgment that required the inclusion of independents or individuals who are contesting the elections as individuals other than through membership of a political party to be included, particularly at the national and provincial level. You may be aware that at the local level, already independents are able to participate at the ward level because we've got a mixed system at that level. But at the national and provincial level, the Electoral Act required individuals to participate only through membership of political parties.
Thanks for that. But, question is, what difference will that make? You've cited the example of local government level. We already have opportunities for the independents to stand there at ward level and proportional representation, the hybrid setup that we have there. But has it yielded any results? What difference would it make, Dr. Mbete?
Well, the argument around the Constitutional Court case that led to the judgment in 2020 was that it shouldn't be required in terms of fulfilling your political rights as a South African adult citizen who can vote. If you want to stand for office, you shouldn't need to be a member of a political party in order to stand. You should be able to stand in your individual capacity and to represent a constituency as an individual rather than through a political party needing to abide by party discipline, as we have seen in many cases in our country since 1994. And so the first thing is that just as an absolute right, it's something that people should be able to do. But the second thing is that it would contribute towards having the opportunity opportunity of direct accountability between the voters and the people that represent them. At the moment, accountability is mediated through political parties and political party structures, and there's not really a direct link between voters and the people that represent them. And there's a feeling that public representatives are more accountable to their party bosses than to the voters that vote for them. But of course, enabling that constitutional court judgment could be done in a number of ways. In terms of which electoral system you would pick. And the one that has been selected makes the most minor changes to the current electoral system that we have at national and provincial level, and may not actually yield the results that people want. To your point around the local government elections, yes, there are some independent ward councillors that have been elected. Not many. The vast majority are still party representatives. And we've seen that has yielded mixed results in terms of direct accountability between those independent ward councillors and the communities that they serve and represent.
But there are many challenges, I think, that still have to be overcome to give meaning to the electoral reforms that we are talking about. And we have elections coming up in South Africa in less than a year, I think. But, if it's constituency-based, you still have to demarcate those constituencies, I think. And there are many other obstacles that have to be overcome on the part of the independent candidates for those who may want to stand. And they have been contentious, and to the extent that they are being appealed and some are being taken to the courts. If you can comment on those, Terry, tell me, how long is it going to take for the constituencies to be demarcated and the other obstacles that have to be overcome?
I've always indicated that in South Africa, you already have got an organization that has got the data sets of our country. The demarcation board, they have been demarcating the country into constituencies, into different sectors. If you look at the ward level, the demarcation board has got the data sets of all the wards in this country. They've been looking at the municipal boundaries. Now, that organization is much more experienced in terms of assisting with the demarcation processes. And all it requires is obviously the legislation to be changed and for the demarcation board to be empowered to be able to do so. But let us also remember that there are also suggestions that have already been made to say, instead of actually even starting afresh, you could actually use the boundaries that are already there. You've got the metropolitan boundaries, you've got the district boundaries, and then all it will need is for the demarcation board basically to refine those boundaries and determine the boundaries for those constituencies. So it does not mean that you're going to be spending years and years trying to divide the country into constituencies, because we've got the framework already. But as I've indicated, you also have got the expertise of an organization that has already been dealing with this particular aspect. So this is something that can be dealt with within a very short space of time. Of course, I'm not suggesting that this could be done in the next month or two. There is still a lot of work that still has to be finalized in order to be able to finally come up with proper constituencies. But the framework does exist. The expertise is there. The data sets, as I've indicated, does already exist in the hands of the demarcation board.
If I could step in here, in terms of the law that was passed and that was signed into law by President Ramaphosa in April of this year, which it seems is going to be the law that's going to be used, the Electoral Amendment Act that's going to be used for the 2024 election. The changes that have been implemented into that law are not particularly extensive, and they don't create a new constituency, a fully constituency-based system for South Africa. What they do, and what this law does, is that it keeps the current closed list proportional representation system that we have, where political parties come up with a list of candidates, they submit it to the IEC, and everyone votes for a party. However, what they've done is that they have they've allowed for independent candidates or individuals to be added to that closed list proportional representation system. So what's going to take place now is that we're going to treat the country as if it is 9 constituencies, the 9 provinces. And so in the National Assembly, with the 400 seats that are in the National Assembly, 200 of those seats are going to be divided up between the 9 provinces. With the Gauteng, with the largest population, will have more of they call them regional seats that are in the National Assembly. Northern Cape, with the smaller population, will have fewer regional seats. The other 200 seats will be national seats. And so the 200 regional seats will be the seats that independent candidates can contest for. The 200 national seats will only be applicable to political parties. Political parties will be able to contest for both the 200 national seats as well as the 200 regional seats. So if you want to run as an independent, you will then register with the IEC. You will tell the IEC where it is that you are a registered voter. So if I wanted to run, I'm registered as a voter in Gauteng. So, but I will be able to also contest for other regional seats in the National Assembly. If I want to contest in the provincial legislature, I can only contest in the Gauteng provincial legislature because that's where I live and that's where I am registered. And then I will then get votes. Hopefully people would want to vote for me. And then and then there'll be a list of independent candidates, people that are running as independents. And the IEC, when the results come in, will use the electoral formula that they currently use, even with political parties, to divide the seats in the 200 regional seats initially among the independent candidates that have contested, that have gotten enough votes, that have crossed the threshold to be able to get a seat in parliament. Once those seats are allocated, then they will then do the allocation for the political parties for those regional seats, and then they'll do the allocation for political parties for both the regional and for the national seats. The point here is that if you are, let's say, in the 2024 election, you need 42,000 votes in order to get a single seat in parliament. If you, as an independent candidate, get 90,000 votes, you're still only going to get the one seat because there's only one of you. So all of the other votes that you've gotten will be discarded, and then you will get the single seat. What would ordinarily happen with a political party is that they would get 2 seats in parliament because the 90,000 votes would be worth 2 seats. So although there's been this addition of independent candidates into the electoral system that we currently have, a lot of the technicality around how the seats will be calculated, the calculations will work to allocate the seats, still mean that the system will benefit political parties far more than it benefits independent candidates.
And I suppose it's going to be one of those controversial issues going forward that will have to be resolved, if ever we'll get there. I go back to the point of the demarcation. The amount of time it's going to take to get the independents to understand what they need to do and to register. They need enough lead time to go out and campaign. Now, given that these things are not done now, it seems to me that the people who register as independent candidates will only have a very short time to go around their respective regions and provinces to campaign for support. Is that likely to be one of the challenges, Terry?
Yeah, definitely it is going to be a problem. I think there are 2 issues here that I just wanted to emphasize at the beginning. Is that there is a current legislation which is going to be implemented by 2024. And then there is also demarcation that has got to happen because there is a panel that has got to be developed, that has got to be constituted in order to be able to deal with the wider electoral reform in the country. So when I was talking about the constituencies that we're talking about, or using, for instance, the municipalities and the districts, it is one of the options that could be followed in the wider electoral reform in the country. But coming back to the issue that you are raising, it is not only the independents that really require information about the new system. It is the voters themselves, but also it is the electoral staff of the IEC that's going to be running this process. And I think that there are going to be great difficulties in the management of the system, largely because of, firstly, lack of sufficient information, the complexity of the process, as well as the fact that not enough civic education has actually gone into teaching people about what is actually supposed to be happening in relation to 2024.
Now, let's look at it from the point of view of the public and citizens. That, okay, we have this system, it's new and it's complex and there are many things still to be overcome. But from a citizen point of view, what difference is it going to make to your political voice? I mean, the whole thing of independent candidate, what will change substantially, really, in how politics is run in the country here, Dr. Mbete?
Well, it's very difficult to predict that at this stage because, as I say, at least at national level, the barriers to entry for independent candidates are actually quite significant in terms of the legislation that was passed in April and with this new law. So I think it's actually unlikely that we're going to get many people contesting as independent candidates at a national level. It is slightly easier, I think, at a provincial level. So if you are an independent candidate that wants to contest to be a member of your provincial legislature, and so you may have a more direct relationship between some of the people who are elected at the provincial level as independent candidates and the people who have voted for them. But as I say, the big hindrance here, or the elephant in the room, really, is that in terms of this current legislation that's been passed in April, it's going to be immensely difficult for independent candidates to put in to really contest. You'll need a huge amount of money. You'll need a huge amount of logistical capacity in order to do so. So I don't actually anticipate that there's going to be much of a difference in terms of who gets elected in 2024. I think we're still going to get the majority of parties being the ones who can campaign properly and who can contest. And so I don't see this really creating much of a difference for voters in the 2024 elections. And as Mr. Tselane says, the law, one of the requirements in the law is the establishment of an electoral panel that will operate to draft and to develop a broader electoral reform process for South Africa, which would then be applied in the 2029 elections. And so I think the big difference around electoral reform will only be felt not in next year's election, but in the 2029 election, depending on what comes out of that reform panel.
Couple of questions. The first one is, who is responsible for the voter education or civic education that's supposed to take place around this electoral reform laws? Because, yourself, Terry, Tselane, Dr. Mbete, you would know about this. I would know to some extent, being in the media, that this is what's happening. But with respect, the average South African is probably not aware of what is happening with this. And somewhere, somebody should be taking the responsibility to inform and educate the public about these changes that are happening, because elections are going to happen, let's say, within the next 12 months or so. So time is very short to make the public aware of what's going on. Terry?
Well, it is the responsibility of quite a number of stakeholders. Firstly, the Electoral Commission, it is in their interest that they've got a higher voter turnout, and that higher voter turnout is going to be dependent on people understanding how the process operates. But the political parties themselves also have got a responsibility of making sure that they mobilize their supporters to be able to participate in the process. So they also play a role in terms of making sure that their supporters understand the electoral process and they turn out in great numbers. But the civic society also has got a responsibility in terms of educating people about the processes. And that's why, in terms of the legislation, the IEC does accredit service providers that are interested in coming up with the voter education processes that will then empower people to participate in this whole process. But the media also has got an important role to play in terms of disseminating information about what would be required for the upcoming elections.
And for you, Dr. Mbete, what are the issues?
Well, I think, the IEC has a mandate to promote voter education. And we know that the IEC does do some voter education, but it's mostly around really the logistics and the mechanics of voting. And as Terry says, they also accredit organizations, civil society organizations, to help them with that. But, let's remember firstly that the IEC's budget has been cut by 770 million over the next 3 years. So between 2022 and 2024, the IEC's budget is being cut by 770 million. And so the resources that are available for the IEC to actually firstly do the logistics of the election, but also to do the requisite training are very limited. And so it's really going to be up to civil society organizations, to the media, to really get the information out to the voters about what the changes are for 2024 and how it will affect them. I think something that's a big gap in our democracy is that we don't have any official organization that works just for civic education in South Africa. There's some countries in West Africa, Ghana, I know quite well, that has a civic education commission. It's a statutory body that teaches the country about civic education. We don't have that here. And so much of that slack is taken up by civil society and by the media, and then with the support of the IEC through the very limited resources that it has.
Well, let me ask what probably is my final question to you, that people will look at the local government setup and say, we have independent candidates or those who represent wards, but the outcome has not really been as ideal as one would think it would be. So I'm imagining that a lot of people will look at what's going on at local government and say, well, we're going to get more or less the same thing as what we got at local government, and therefore not have confidence in the new changes. Is there potential to have a change of how politics is conducted in South Africa with this new reform?
Well, I think that we must remember, firstly, that you don't change an entire political system just through the electoral system. The issues of accountability that we have in this country are issues of political culture, the way that politics is done, and the way and the relationship between politicians and the people that they represent, the people that vote for them. And that's a bigger issue than just the electoral system. I think the second thing is that there's something really around the way in which political party politics is being done in South Africa. And unfortunately, the scope of the Constitutional Court judgment was limited to independent candidates. But I think that there is something that needs to be asked around how accountable are political parties and political party leaders, not just to to the citizenry as a whole, but even to their own members. What are the mechanisms of internal party democracy? How well do those parties hold their own members and their own leaders accountable, for us to then have the kind of accountability that we expect once those leaders are being elected into official national government positions. And then the third thing I want to say is, let's also remember that at local government level, it's less than 10%, and Terry would correct me, it is a fraction of ward councillors that are independent candidates. The vast majority of ward councillors are political party representatives, which gets us back to this question of, there's a bigger issue that we have here, which is around how accountable and how functional or dysfunctional our political party structures are, and the effect of that on the politics of the country as a whole.
Terry, last word to you.
I completely agree with Dr. Mbete. I think what has actually happened is that even though at the local level we're supposed to be having a system that would allow constituencies to be able to determine their own leaders, it has actually been contaminated by the way the political parties are operating, because even though a ward councillor is supposed to be representing a ward, political parties make their ward councillors who win at the ward level to be accountable to the political party. So it really defeats the system. I mean, it defeats the purpose of why the system was introduced in the first instance. And then hopefully this is not going to be happening now when we come now with a proper process that's going to be dealing with now a proper electoral reform for South Africa.
Terry Tselane, thank you very much for having been with me here on this panel discussion. Dr. Sithembile Mbete, thanks again for your insights, much appreciated. And we hope that we made a little bit of contribution to the better understanding of what these electoral reforms are all about. Thank you.